was a man who went out in his backyard one day. He went out into the backyard and he was walking around his backyard, and all of a sudden he heard this meowing. Meowing. And he looked around, and then finally he looked up in a tree, and there out on a limb was a kitten. A kitten. A terrified kitten up out on this limb of the tree. Well, the man, he tried to coax the kitten down. He called the kitten, of course, and he did all sorts of things to try to reach up and get that kitten. And he even put a bowl of milk out for a while down there at the bottom of the tree, hoping the kitten would come down the tree and get the milk. This kitten didn't want the milk, apparently. Stayed up in the tree. And so he was trying to figure out how he was going to get that kitten down out of the tree. And I think he'd probably watched one too many episodes of the Red Green show. Anyone ever seen Red Green? Yeah. You know, if you ever want to understand how men operate, just watch that show a couple times, okay? But anyway, this guy, he was sort of that mindset. And he got sort of inventive. So he got him a rope because the tree wasn't a very strong tree, and he knew he couldn't climb the tree because it would break. So he got a rope, and he threw it up in the tree and got a hold of the tree up there high, and he began to pull on that rope as hard as he could, but he couldn't budge the tree. And so then this is where Red Green kick in, okay? He got his car. There was an alley behind the house, and he hooked the rope to his car. You see where this is going? And he hooked that rope and he pulled it really tight, and he pulled it just a little tighter, and it started to bend the tree down, and he thought, okay. So he pulled it a little bit more, and he thought he could go reach that cat, and he couldn't get to the cat, and he pulled a little more, and finally he said, okay, it was just that close. He could almost reach the cat, and so he went to the car and he gave it just one more little bit of gas and pulled it just a little tighter, and you know what happened, don't you? The rope broke. Boing! And there went the kitten, sailing off into the sky. He couldn't find the kitten. He felt awful all of a sudden, and he couldn't find the kitten, and so he began to go house to house in the neighborhood, knocking on doors. Have you seen the cat? Did he land in your yard? Did he land on your roof? I mean, have you seen this kitten? It's somewhere. I know the kitten's somewhere. And he went door to door and doing that, and he couldn't find the cat. No one had seen the kitten. And so he finally just gave up and said, I'll just pray. He said, Lord, I just commit this kitten to your keeping. Amen. He figured he'd done all he could. So he went on about his things and his business for the day and just went on about doing his thing. Well, a few days later, he went to the grocery store there in the neighborhood, and he ran into one of his neighbors there. And he stopped to say hello, and he looked in her cart, and she had a bag of cat food. And he thought, well, that's strange. Because he knew this woman well enough to know that she didn't like cats. You know, she wasn't a cat person. You know, there's cat people and there are non-cat. Well, she was a non-cat person, okay? And so he asked her, he said, so I noticed in your cart there, you're buying some cat food. And I know you're not fond of, you don't like cats, actually. I know you don't like cats. So why are you buying cat food? And she replied, well, you won't believe this. And he told her how her little girl had been begging for a cat, had been begging her forever for a cat, and she kept refusing this little girl, and the begging continued. And she got so tired of hearing her beg for, have you ever had a kid that just begged for something, you know? Begged and begged, got so tired of hearing this begging that she just told her daughter, she said, well, if God gives you a cat, you can keep it. You know where this is going, don't you? Well, she told her neighbor, she said, you know, I watched my child. When I said that, she went out in the backyard, and she knelt down, and she began to pray. She began to pray. And she was there praying, and she said, this is going to sound crazy. You're not going to believe this, but this is going to sound crazy. But she was praying there, and suddenly a kitten fell from the sky right into her arms. What do you do with that? You see, prayer is the most powerful force in our lives, yes. And sometimes it can be dangerous, especially if you get a cat coming down with extended claws, right? Well, usually when we think of prayer, though, we don't think of cats falling from the sky, do we? We think of a place that is peaceful and serene, a place that's sort of like the hymn we sang this morning, the old hymn, Sweet Hour of Prayer. That's what we think of, isn't it? Sweet hour of prayer. Solitude, quiet, peaceful, set apart, a place where we commune with God, a place where we can center all the scatteredness of our lives in that place. A place where we seek the guidance of the Spirit, where we discern the will and desire of God for our lives. When we think of prayer in church, we think of the pastoral prayer, or the prayers of the people, the intercessory prayers for those who are hurting among us and beyond us out in the world and the community. We think of prayer as sort of like a safety zone, if you will, a refuge from all the chaos of life, a refuge from the fast lane of life, a refuge from all the potholes that we encounter in our daily lives, a place to be revived, a place to be replenished, a place to realign our lives with Christ. That's how we think of prayer most of the time. But you see, in the Gospel of Mark, that's not how the author understands prayer in Jesus' life. In Jesus' life, it's no sweet hour of prayer, okay? Prayer comes in the Gospel of Mark as a very dangerous activity. Perhaps the most dangerous of all the things that Jesus does is pray. Dangerous. Cats with their claws out, dangerous type of stuff. It's fraught with peril and risk, this prayer is. Prayer takes Jesus to a place. It takes Jesus to a place that he's been in public so many times, in the public cosmic battle that goes on between good and evil, the cosmic battle that goes on in his teaching and his preaching and in his healing. That same cosmic battle not only is out there when he's preaching and worship and ministering, but now in prayer we discover it's in his private prayer life too. Let's review some instances in Mark's gospel. Remember, just after Jesus was baptized, what he did? He went to the wilderness, right? He went out into the wilderness. He goes there to do what? To pray, right? And there he's preparing for his public ministry. The sojourn, though, is anything but peaceful and calm, because there in the wilderness, Jesus prays, and he's also tempted by the Satan. And there also he wrestles with his own identity in the light of his calling. There in the wilderness in prayer. For 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus does this battle with the tempter. It's a place of danger. It's a place of danger. And only after praying for that time, only after being tempted for that time, only after being in that place of danger, Jesus emerges and begins his earthly ministry. What is even more troubling in Mark's gospel is that Mark suggests that prayer keeps on being the same every time. It's dangerous for Jesus throughout his entire ministry over and over again. But it also is preparation for his ministry throughout his entire earthly ministry. Right up to that last prayer. The prayer he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. The prayer he prayed there in the garden in preparation for him to go to the cross. That prayer. That prayer was fraught with temptation as well. But it was a preparation for that ultimate act of ministry. Even in the times of seeming solitude and quiet, those times Jesus goes apart by himself, they're not nearly as peaceful as we first expect. Yet they're always followed by Jesus moving into ministry every time he prays. Every time he prays, there's a temptation, there's danger, but it always moves him out into ministry. Today's gospel lesson gives us the same picture. It says, in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up and went to a deserted place, and there he prayed. He got up, he went out to a deserted place while it was still dark, and there he prayed. Following a very full day of ministry from the day before, he goes out to pray. You know, he's probably had not much sleep that night. He's probably exhausted when he goes out after that previous day. Just look at the previous 24 hours, what all he had done. In the morning, he cast out the demons out of the man there at the synagogue. And then in the afternoon, he goes to Andrew and Simon's home. And presumably, he's going there to get to rest himself from all the activity at the synagogue. And lo and behold, the mother-in-law is sick. And so what does he do? He heals her. And then in the evening, the word is spread about his powers, and the entire city gathers around that place where he's staying. And they bring him all the sick and all the demon-possessed. And yes, all of them from the entire region come to that place so that he could heal them. He'd had a very long day. And remember that Jesus was fully divine, but yes, he was also fully human. So I'm guessing he had every reason to be exhausted. And so he slips out of that house early in the morning, not waking any of the others, and he heads to this deserted place where he can be alone for a change, where he can pray, where he can engage in the most intimate relationship he has. That's right. It's where he can engage in that most intimate of all his relationships, the intimate relationship he has with God the Father. The Father, the one he calls Abba, Daddy. That's what he goes to do. But Mark lets us know that even in that place of escape, even in that place called a wilderness, a deserted place, a wilderness, the very same word that was used to describe the place that Jesus went when he was tempted by Satan, Mark seems to be letting us know that even Jesus' own quiet time was probably not as quiet as we think. The wilderness was trying to distract him from God. The wilderness was trying to distract him from his calling, from his mission, from his purpose. It too created a time of great struggle in which Jesus was confronted with temptation, a temptation to lose focus on God's will for him, to lose focus on his most intimate relationship in his life, the most important relationship. And when the disciples rose in the morning, they couldn't find him. He wasn't there. They began to search for him. They searched everywhere. They searched. And finally, they came barging in to where he was. And they announced to him, everyone is searching for you. Everyone. Everyone is searching for you. Which suggests that he ought to come out again and wow the crowd. Give him a couple of more good miracles, Jesus. Come on, man. You see, the disciples are giving outer voice to the temptation. The temptation to revel in the adoration of his prior ministry. The temptation to feed his ego, if you will. But Jesus doesn't give in to that. Because Jesus has this intimate relationship based in his prayer life with God. And God, he knows what God's calling him to do. God's calling him to a future ministry. God's calling him to go forward to the next town and the other towns and preach and proclaim the good news. Jesus is being made known by his prayer life. By his prayer life. As Christians, you and I are called to follow Jesus. It's our calling. We are called to follow Jesus. However, we too have a temptation. We have this temptation in our lives to trust in our past success. To trust in our past success, our past glory, if you will, rather than moving forward to a new day, a new faith venture that God is calling us to. We do that individually. We remember the high points of our faith journey. Oh, yeah. But see, the problem is we have to let go of those and lean into God through prayer to move to the new day he's calling us toward. We do that as a church. We do that as a church. We talk about the glory days of this time or that time. Oh, those great days of the past. We even want to go back to the past. But we have to let go of it. We have to let go of our past in order to lean into God so that God can work God's will in our lives and move us forward to the future. However tempting it is for our own self-promotion from time to time, we have to let go of that. Rather than holding on to that, we then need to be promoting God's reign and God's kingdom. How tempting it is for each of us to rest on yesterday's accomplishments rather than on the Spirit that equips us for tomorrow's opportunities. How tempting it is to play to the crowd. Play to the crowd we know and we're comfortable with, the people we've known for 20, 30 years that we're comfortable with. How tempting that is for us rather than stretching out our hand to those who are in need, who are all of our neighbors. To all of our neighbors. We must feed this most important relationship in our lives through prayer. And then and only then will Jesus be made known through our prayer life. Only then. However, because of these reasons and more, prayer is a dangerous activity for us. In prayer, we come not only face to face with God, but we come face to face with the very demons that are inside of us. Demons that would destroy our relationship with God. You know, the demons of jealousy and deceit, where we fool ourselves. The demons of our own egos and our pride. Henry Nouwen describes the experience of solitude and prayer this way. He says, when we enter into a time of prayer, we are entering into the furnace of transformation. Think about that image. We are entering into the very furnace of transformation. That's not the sweet hour of prayer concept, okay? This is the furnace of transformation, a furnace where there's fire that melts steel and allows it to be molded and shaped. The furnace of transformation. It's filled with struggles with the tempter. It's only through this practice that we can really make Jesus, though, known to the world. It's by being willing to enter into the furnace of transformation in our lives. In prayer, there is always the temptation. Therefore, we should not approach prayer with a naive expectation that it's going to be easy or that it's going to be serene. But we should approach prayer with open-eyed realization that when we enter into prayer, we're entering into a wilderness, a place where the forces of good, of God and evil compete for our relationship. It's a place where the forces of God and evil compete for our relationship. However, Mark's gospel also testifies to the good news that the author of Hebrews puts so eloquently. Though tempted in every way like us, Jesus was without sin. Though he was tempted in every way possible, Jesus was without sin. Jesus did not fall prey to the temptation to wow the crowd. No, he didn't, did he? Jesus did not fall to that. Jesus did not fall to feeding his own ego. Jesus responded in faithfulness to God's calling upon his life. God's calling was for him to preach that all might hear the good news. That all might hear the good news and believe. That was his calling. And he was able to do that because he kept that intimate relationship with God intact all the way through. Jesus was made known to the world because of that focus he had, focus in prayer. With confidence, let us constantly approach Jesus in prayer so that we'll be able to discern God's call for our lives, so we might become the good news. You and I might become the very good news, so that we might make Jesus known to the world through the power of prayer. The furnace of transformation. The furnace of transformation that transforms your and my life so that it more fully reflects Christ to the world. That's the power of prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.